Now that we've had some fun with Junie B, it's time for something a little new. Coraline. I've heard a lot about the stop motion and I thought it would be fun to check out the original source material since we're doing a spooky story series counting down to Halloween. So let's do this. Let's get scared together. I've never read this, so you're gonna see all my blind reactions to every little detail. So here we go. Coraline. By Neil Gaiman. Forward. Coraline. We moved into our flat Little Mend in the tiny Sussex town of Nutley in the south of England in 1987. I probably should give her a British accent then, if she's from England, you know. Once on a time, it had been a manor house built for the old man who had once owned the house before he sold it to repair a local builders, told me the physician to the King of England himself. It had been a manor house then, but it was now converted into flats. Flat number 4, where we lived, was a good place, if a little odd. Above us, a Greek family. Beneath us, a little old lady, half blind, who would telephone me whenever my little children moved and tell me that she was not certain what was happening upstairs, but she thought that it must be elephants. I was never entirely certain how many flats there were in the house, nor how many of them were occupied. We had a hallway running the length of that flat, as big as any rooms. Excuse me. At the end of the hall hung a wardrobe door as a mirror. When I started to write a book for Holly, my 5-year-old daughter, I set it in the house. It seemed easy. That way I wouldn't have to explain to her where anything was. I changed a couple of things, of course. Swapped the position of Holly's room and the lounge. Then I took a closed oak panel door that opened onto a brick wall and a sense of the place from the drawing room in the room I grew up in. That house was big and old, and it had been split into 2 just before we moved there. We had the servants' quarters, except for one room, the oak-paneled drawing room, only for Bess, with a door at the end that had once been the family's entrance, and now it led nowhere. It opened onto a brick wall. I took that room and that door along with the front room of my grandmother's house, only for Bess, not for the family. Still life, old paintings of fruit on the walls, and put them into the book I had started writing. The book was called Coraline. I had typed the name Caroline, and it came out wrong. I looked at the word Coraline, and I knew it was someone's name. I wanted to know what happened to her. Holly liked scary stories with witches and brave little girls in them. Those were the kinds of stories she told me, so Holly's story was going to be scary. I wrote an opening that I later deleted. It went, this story This is the story of Coraline, who was small for her age and found herself in dark danger. Before it was all over, Coraline had seen what lay behind mirrors and had a close call with a bad hand, and had come face to face with her other mother. She had rescued her true parents from a fate worse than death and triumphed against overwhelming odds. This is the story of Coraline, who lost her parents and found them again, and more or less escaped more or less unscathed. I stopped writing Holly's book when we moved to America. I had been writing it in my own time. It didn't seem like I had any own time any longer. 6 years later, I picked it up and continued from the middle of the sentence I'd stopped at in August 1992. It was, "Hello? Hello?" said Coraline. "How did you get in?" The cat didn't say anything. Coraline got out of bed. I started it again because I realized that if I didn't, my youngest daughter, Maddie, would be too old for it by the time I was done. I started it for Holly. I finished it for Maddie. Now we were living in a Gothic old house in the middle of America, with a tourniquet and a wraparound porch with steps to it. It's a house built over 100 years ago by a German immigrant. A cartographer, that's someone who makes maps, and an artist, his son, Henry, was said to have been the first man to put an engine on a boat or on a bicycle, and was described as the greatest creative figure in the history of the racing car. Now I was writing Coraline again. I still had no time, so I would write 50 words a night in bed before I fell asleep. I went on a cruise to raise money for the First Amendment. That's the one about freedom of speech in comics. I finished it in a little cabin on the lake in the woods. Dave McKean, artist and friend, took photographs of Little Men, which he then played with to make the house on the back cover of Coraline. Right there, that's it. When Henry Selick made his stop-motion animated film of Coraline, he invited me to the studio. There were a lot of sets, each behind a black curtain. Henry proudly showed me the house that Coraline lived in the film. She'd moved to somewhere in England, to Oregon now. And the house she was in was called the Pink Palace. "That's my house," I told Henry. And it was. Henry Selvik's Pink Palace was the house I lived in now. Turret and porch and all. None of us were quite sure how that happened, but it seemed strangely appropriate for a book that was started for one daughter in one house and finished it for another in another house. The book was published in 2002, and people liked it. It won awards. More importantly than that, it worked. At least for some people. I'd wanted to write a story for my daughters that told them something I wish I'd known when I was a boy. That being brave didn't mean you weren't scared. Being brave meant you were scared, really scared, badly scared, and you did the right thing anyway. So now, 10 years later, I've started running into women who tell me that Coraline got them through hard times in their lives. That when they were scared, they thought of Coraline. And they did the right thing anyway. And that, more than anything, makes it all worthwhile. Neil Gaiman. December 5th, 2011. That's like 12 years ago? No, 11 years ago. 11 years ago. No. 10 years ago. 10 years ago. Anywho, chapter 1. Coraline discovered the door a little while after they moved into the house. It was a very old house. It had an attic under the roof and the cellar under the ground and an overgrown garden with huge old trees in it. Coraline's family didn't own all of the house. It was too big for that. Instead, they owned part of it. There were other people who lived in the old house. Mrs. Spink and Mrs. Forcible lived in the flat below Coraline's on the ground floor. They were both old and round, and they lived in their flat with a number of aging Highland Terriers who had names like Hamish and Andrew and Jock. Once upon a time, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible had been actresses, as Miss Spink told Coraline the first time she met her. "You see, Coraline," Miss Spink said, getting Caroline. "Oh, you see, Caroline," Miss Spink said, getting Coraline's name wrong. "Both myself and Miss Forcible were famous actresses in our time. We trod the broad Lovey. Oh, don't let Hamish eat the fruitcake, or he'll be up all night with his tummy." "It's Coraline, not Caroline. Coraline," said Coraline. In the flat above Coraline's, under the roof, was a crazy old man with a big mustache. He told Coraline that he was training a mouse circus. He wouldn't let anyone see it. One day, little Caroline, when they are all ready, everyone in the whole world will see the wonders of my mouse circus. You asked me why you cannot see it now? Is that what you asked me?" "No," said Coraline quietly. I asked you not to call me Caroline. It's Coraline. The reason you cannot see the mouse circus," said the man upstairs, "is that the mice are not ready and rehearsed. Also, they refuse to play the song I have written for them. All the songs I have written for the mice to play go oomfa, oomfa. But the white mice will only play toodle toodle like that. I am thinking of trying them on different types of cheese." Coraline didn't think there really was a mouse circus. She thought the old man was probably making it up. The day they moved in, Coraline went exploring. She explored the garden. It was a big garden. At the very back was an old tennis court. But no one in the house played tennis, and the fence around the court had holes in it, and the net had mostly rotted away. There was an old rose garden filled with stunted, fly-bound rose bushes. There was a rockery that was all rocks. There was a fairy ring made of squiddy brown toadstools, which smelled dreadful if you accidentally trod on them. And I'm going to close my door because I can hear every word my dad is saying downstairs. It's throwing me off. Where were we? There was also a well. On the first day Coraline's family moved in, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible had made a point of telling Coraline how dangerous the well was, and they warned her to be sure to keep away from it, so Coraline set off to explore it. so that she knew where it was to keep away from it properly. She found it on the third day in an overgrown meadow, beside the tennis court, behind a clump of trees, a low brick circle almost hidden in the high grass. The well had been covered up by wooden boards to stop anyone falling in. There was a small knothole in one of the boards, and Coraline spent an afternoon dropping pebbles and acorns through the hole and waiting and counting until she heard the plop as they hit the water far below. Coraline also explored for animals. She found a hedgehog and a snakeskin, but no snake, and a rock that looked just like a frog, and a toad that looked just like a rock. There was also a haughty black cat who sat on the walls and tree stumps and watched her, but slipped away after she went over to try to play with it. That was how she spent her first 2 weeks in the house, exploring the garden and the grounds. Her mother made her come back inside for dinner and for lunch, and Coraline had to make sure she dressed up warm before she went out, for it was a very cold summer that year. But go out she did, exploring every day until the day it rained, when Coraline had to stay inside. "What should I do?" asked Coraline. "Read a book," said her mother. Watch a video. Play with your toys. Go pester Miss Spinkett and Miss Forcible, or the crazy old man upstairs." "Oh," said Coraline. "I don't want to do those things. I want to explore." "I don't really mind what you do," said Coraline's mother, "as long as you don't make a mess." Coraline went over to the window and watched the rain come down. It wasn't the kind of rain you could go out in. It was the other kind, the kind that threw itself down from the sky and splashed where it landed. It was rain that meant business, and currently its business was turning the garden into a muddy, wet soup. Coraline had watched all the videos. She was bored with her toys, and she'd read all her books. She turned on the television. She went from channel to channel to channel, but there was nothing on but men in suits talking about the stock market and talk shows. Eventually, she found something to watch. It was the last half of a natural history program about something called protective coloration. She watched animals, birds, and insects which disguise themselves as leaves or twigs or other animals to escape from things that could hurt them. She enjoyed it, but it ended too soon and was followed by a program about a cake factory. It was time to talk to her father. Coraline's father was home. Both of her parents worked doing things on computers, which meant that they were home a lot of the time. Each of them had their own study. "Hello, Coraline," he said, when he came in without turning around. Said Coraline. "It's raining." "Yep," said her father. "It's bucketing out." "No," said Coraline. "It's just raining." "Can I go outside?" "What does your mother say?" She said you're not going out in weather like that." Coraline Jones. "Then no." "But I want to go exploring." "Then explore the flat," suggested her father. "Look, here's a piece of paper and a pen. Count all the doors and windows. List everything blue. Mount an expedition to discover the hot water tank. And leave me alone to work." "Can I go into the drawing room?" The drawing room was where the Joneses kept the expensive and uncomfortable furniture. Coraline's grandmother had left them when she died. Coraline wasn't allowed in there. Nobody went in there. It was only for the best. If you don't make a mess and you don't touch anything,